Hello, welcome back to the Prep Podcast. This is episode 6 of season 1, and my name is Taylor Kaplan. I'm the host / producer / director. We are having so much fun on this podcast, and I'm really looking forward to today's episode because we have a very specific focus today, and it's very prominent in our industry that we work in. So we are focusing on resilience surrounding performers' anxiety today. And we have some very, very, very special guests. You've seen one of them before. Her name is Jessi Clayton. She is the co-owner / co-founder of the Prep. And then we have Dr. Michael Jacobs joining us today. He is a licensed clinical psychologist who specializes in working with performers and is also the owner of the Performance Institute for Cognitive and Behavioral Therapies. So welcome, guys.
Hi. Thank you so much for having us. So excited to be doing this today.
Yeah, as am I. I'm glad we're getting to do this. I think this is really important.
Yeah,
I think
it's
so
very
too.
important.
Yeah, such an important topic. And I think it's not one that's talked about enough. Like, I think as coaches, and I mean, me included, like we tend to focus on like the result of the tape, the result of the audition, as opposed to our well-being around artistry and auditioning. So happy to be talking about this with you guys today.
Definitely. Awesome. So just to get started, I want us to define resilience. So Dr. Jacobs, if you could define resilience, what would you say about it?
Sure. I would say resilience is the ability to sort of cope with and bounce back from different types of stress or adversity, any kind of challenge or failure. I want to make sure that everyone remembers this is not about not failing or never failing. This is about failing possibly and then picking yourself back up, changing the way you relate to your thoughts, your feelings, changing your behavior, all in service of continuing what you love to do and what's important to you.
Yeah.
I completely agree with what Dr. Jacobs said. Resilience, the ability to bounce back or spring back easily, especially with our students auditioning so much, you hear way more no's than like that one occasional yes. And that can be really hard, especially for our young students. We have students of all ages, but like the 8, 9, 10-year-old, it's hard when they just want a part so badly and want to do this so badly. And you hear no, 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 waiting for that one yes. So just reminding ourselves, like Michael said, it's not about not failing or not, getting to a point in your career where you no longer hear no's, but it's how do we cope with that? How do we bounce back? How do we return to being an artist as opposed to just focusing on that one role or that one booking?
Yeah. I really like all of that. And I've dealt with a lot of students before who are constantly auditioning, or they get few auditions and they're never really hearing back, or they make it through and then it's just that one thing where they don't get that booking, and it can be really discouraging. So when you guys see this, how do you typically go about encouraging kids or adults to stay resilient?
Yeah, I can go first. I would say that a lot of it is figuring out what people value, and helping them to identify those values and relate back to them, right? Why am I doing this? Why is this important to me? It can be really, really challenging because, as you said, Taylor, this is a very challenging career path. There are a lot of no's, a lot more no's than yeses. There's a lot of ambiguity. It's not the same thing as becoming an architect, right? You become an architect and you sort of know there are steps you take to become an architect. You do those steps, and if you're good at being an architect, chances are you're going to advance and become a better architect and a more successful architect. Here, there are constant ups and downs. You're constantly applying for new jobs, and you often never hear back. So I think a big part of that is identifying what's important. Who do I want to be as a performer? Who do I want to bring to auditions? Why am I doing this? Who do I want to be in life, and what's most important to me? And when you can identify that, you can relate back to that and set new and different goals that are in line with that.
I love that. Great answer. It can be challenging sometimes, especially when students take no's personally. and like think it's like something's wrong with me. I'm not doing enough. I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. So something I personally have really incorporated in my coaching practice, in my acting practice, is that we are always enough. You always have what you need for the role. It's about being yourself and living fully by stepping into a character's shoes. It's never like a math equation or a book report where we have to figure out the exact formula of, okay, what are the steps I need to do in this take? What do I need to do in order to book the job? And I think it's just really reminding students, just lead with yourselves, just be yourselves in your work. And it's never about like a math formula and getting it 100% right. And I think it's also just reminding students, why are we actors? Like, what first drew you to the arts? Why did you fall in love with acting? Hopefully it wasn't just to book jobs and book roles. There was something about a show you saw or the first time you were on stage that was electrifying for you. And you decided, like, this is what I want to do. I want to be involved in the arts. I have to do this. I need to be an artist. Part of how I identify is as an artist and as an actor. And I think it's just remembering like why we act and why we do this is to tell stories.
Definitely.
Yep. I would say to that, and some of the things I say today might be a little bit unpopular, but that may also tell you, and I could say this from personal experience. I used to be a professional actor myself. And that's exactly why I left, was I found that I loved booking jobs. I loved being good at it. I loved sort of that reward, but I wasn't really connected to doing it. And so if it isn't something you value, it's a pretty tough thing to be doing just because you want to book the next job, right?
Yes.
You could do things that pay a lot better and are a lot more, that have a lot more rewards along the way. If you value those things more. And that's why I ended up going back to school, actually, was I found that I was really mostly connected to just booking the next job, booking a job,
I feel like in a lot of performers, perfectionism is a really, really big thing. Can you talk about perfectionism at all?
Yes. Perfectionism, honestly, mental health issues are much more common amongst performing artists than the general population. Perfectionism plays a huge role. People want to get everything right, and they tend to get into this loop. It's okay to sort of have high standards for yourself and to say, I'd like to do my best work. I want to put sufficient effort. Right? That could be related to values. But perfectionism is really about having these really rigid, high standards that if you don't meet them, you end up beating yourself up. And oftentimes when you do meet them, you kind of dismiss that as just, well, I did what I did. I did my best. That one was fine, right? When you do well, you kind of dismiss it. And when you don't do well, you end up beating yourself up. Or maybe you avoid trying to do well in the first place. Maybe you don't go and book that session with your coach because you think, well, am I really going to do this? When you go and put that extra effort in, it can sometimes be more impactful. So perfectionism can also cause people to avoid getting the help that they need, and to avoid trying to do well because their standards are so high and rigid.
100%. And I see that all the time while taping students, is that like I have to get it right. And then the tape becomes about getting like the perfect thing, going back to what I was saying before. It becomes about doing a good job. And okay, like how am I, and acting is so different than, anything else we do. Like if they go to school, it's different than earning the A, but I think we have this mentality of, more than just like a value, but it's like, okay, how can this be exactly right? How can I do all of the steps? And it becomes about doing as opposed to just exploration and freedom and allowing acting to be an extension of yourself and really giving yourself permission to play. Like when we're focused on getting it perfect and just getting it right and doing a good job, we stunt ourselves. We think control is the answer and what the tape needs and what the audition needs, but really it's irreverence. Irreverence being like the opposite of perfectionism and just letting it be an exploration.
I can speak from an actor's perspective where I've dealt with perfectionism. I mean, I've been acting for 6-7 years now professionally, and growing up I was always very, like, with school and everything, very much a perfectionist. So that's why I kind of asked that question.
Mm.
But when I
Yeah.
find that I'm in my head like that, it's impossible. It's impossible to connect, and it's impossible to be real. So it's really, they kind of just go head to head in that sort of scenario. So yeah, we're trying to get rid of that perfectionism.
Yeah, and where should your focus be when you're in an audition or in a performance for both of you?
Well, it should be like on your partner and on the story, and
Yeah.
what are we feeling right now too. And I think that's such, and Michael, I know you can talk more about this than I can, but it's about accepting how we feel right
Yep,
now in the moment. And if we're nervous, if we're scared, it's doing that tape scared and
that's exactly
allowing
right.
yourself just accept what you feel. Accept what you feel it fully, as opposed to using the energy to try and get rid of it, because then all your energy is going to go to, don't feel nervous, don't be nervous, it's fine, I'm fine. But instead, if we just accept what we're feeling in the moment, and yeah, okay, and I'm going to do it right from here and what I'm feeling now. And Michael, if you want to add to that, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you're making, and it's exactly what I would want to say. I think a big part of this is accepting how we feel. People come to me. One of my specialties is audition and performance anxiety, and people come and they say, I want to go to auditions and I want to feel more confident. I want to not feel anxious when I go
Mm-hmm.
in. And we don't have that much control over how we're going to feel when we go there.
Right.
What we have control over is how we relate to those emotions, how we relate to the thoughts that come up, being in the moment and auditioning. That's really what's going to make it better. So I developed treatment for performance and audition anxiety as part of my thesis and dissertation back when I was getting my PhD, and I still use that today. And one of the most interesting things we found in the study, all with professional musical theater performers, was that even though they suspected that there were some mock auditions as part of this, so they performed for me. So even though they suspected they weren't doing very well when they were feeling anxious, it turns out they seemed to the outside eye like they were doing quite well. There was no correlation between how anxious they
Wow.
were and what kind of performance they gave. And it was actually the small things they did to avoid feeling anxious in the moment that were most noticeable and disqualifying. So if somebody comes in and they say, "Oh, I'm so sorry," "Oh, I'm sorry, I messed up that note," all of a sudden I'm sitting there thinking, "What note? What note did you mess up? I don't know. Now I have to go back and think about this," right? But their performance, from my perspective, might have been excellent.
Mm.
So not only is it useless to try and make these feelings go away, as you said, Jessi, uh, but it ends up putting your focus other places where you don't want it to be. You end up using all of your energy trying to fight something that'll never go away. Better
Mm.
to accept it, make room for it, and learn to be there and relate to it in a different way.
Love that. Yeah. And I love what you said. It's you're not going to be able to, and I think that's you're not going to be able to not feel anxious or nervous. It's
Right?
allowing yourself to feel it. And I think a lot of, people who haven't studied this or haven't dived deeper into this do feel like that's the instinct is, okay, I have to go to therapy to not feel anxious anymore, and then everything will be great. And no, most people
Yes.
don't realize it's like actually like the opposite. No, it's actually inviting ourselves to feel this way and accept it. And then how
Mm-hmm.
do we work through it? How do we work through the nerves, for a big audition or tape? So I love that you clarified that for people.
Sometimes we get lucky and can utilize it in a scene.
Yes,
So.
100%. 100%.
Absolutely. Either way, it's there or it's not there, right? Sometimes it comes when you don't expect it. Sometimes it doesn't come when you do expect it. It can be a little bit
Mm,
unpredictable. Feelings in general can be pretty unpredictable, but they are
Totally.
impermanent, and that's something to remember too. People
mm,
often predict, right? I'm going to feel anxious, and I'm going to feel so anxious that I can't manage, or I'm going to feel anxious forever.
mm.
And I mean, do you know anyone who's felt anxious perpetually forever? I don't. I can be anxious at
I do
times,
not.
but it
Right.
does come and it comes and it goes.
Well, Michael, I have a question for you.
Absolutely.
In what sort of scenarios would you see resilience come up?
So I think resilience comes up for performers in a lot of different ways. As we mentioned before, this is a particularly challenging career, and there are certain ways that performers uh, or certain times when performers have extra challenges or extra things that they need to be aware of or might want to be aware of related to their values as a performer, that maybe the rest of the population doesn't necessarily have to, right? So, for instance, physical health challenges like either long term illnesses or short term illnesses, that can be really, really challenging for people. And a lot of what I'm about to say, again, may be kind of controversial or unpopular, but I want to make sure everyone remembers this is about your values. This is about what is it that I want to bring? Who is it that I want to be? So, for instance, one that I've dealt with and that a lot of performers deal with is acid reflux. So, back when I was a
Mm-hmm.
performer, for instance, I have exercise induced reflux. So, if I do any kind of cardio, I tend to lose my voice. So back when I was performing, I would go to the gym in the morning and lift weights, and then I would go to my auditions. So I lived in Queens. I would go into Manhattan, do an audition, then I'd go back to Queens, and then I would do cardio later in the day after my auditions were over to make sure I still had a voice. And that's really challenging. And I would say that also something that people would like to forget at this point, I think, is how much COVID impacts performers, both in the short term and the long term. So even though the risk of maybe dying from COVID is much smaller than it was a couple of years ago, the risk of getting long COVID, where you have um, difficulty breathing or singing or worsened or new acid reflux or other things, is still extraordinarily high, somewhere in the 10 to 30% range per infection. And that's going to disproportionately impact performers.
Mm.
And so, what do we do about this, right? And so, it may be that you want to do something like continue wearing a mask even before an important audition or an important performance, something that might seem unpalatable. Or if you have acid reflux, you might want to change what you eat. If you're an adult and you like to drink wine and you find that wine causes you to have acid reflux attacks and you can't sing, or you might need to take medication that you don't want to take, um, those are all choices that we can make, but we want to base them on our own values, right? If you value being present and bringing your best to auditions, these are some things you might want to consider doing, and that's how you do it, right? You, in that moment where you want to, I don't know, go out and eat very fatty foods, I don't know if that's a trigger for you for acid reflux, you might say, well, I value the pleasure of, going out and eating my favorite meal. That's actually more important to me than my career. And so you might go and do that. Or you might say, actually, being present for this important audition, that's really important to me. And so I'm going to eat something else, or I'm going to cut out coffee, or I'm going to continue wearing a mask even though other people aren't, right? So these are all choices we can make, but you want to make sure that you're relating it back to your own personal values rather than reacting to however you feel in the moment. I feel like I really want to eat this, or I just want freedom, or whatever it is that you want in the moment, um, may or may not be uh, more or less important than, you know, uh, how it's going to impact you and your voice later on.
Very interesting. Now, do we feel like resilience is something that you're born with, and if you have it, you're lucky. If you don't, you're just in deep luck, like, I don't know? Or do you think it's a skill that you can sort of work on and develop and work towards?
I absolutely think it's a skill that can be learned. It takes a lot of discipline. And Michael can talk about this too, but it's about mindset. I think the best way we can train our mindset is what we've been talking about in finding our values and what do we value and why are we actors in the first place. It's to tell stories, it's not to book that role or book that job and putting so much pressure on ourselves to book that job and book that role. And through help, like with what Dr. Jacobs does, and helping artists find that for themselves and take that pressure off, and just enjoy the moment, enjoy the experience and the exploration of that character and that audition, and just really fully enjoy being an artist and reminding yourself why you are in the first place. Something else I do want to add to that, going on with this whole talk, is to parents. I find that students who enjoy this the most and who, as a result, end up booking the most and doing the best is ones whose parents just say, yep, I'm going to let them enjoy this. I'm not going to drive this, hands off the wheel.
Yes.
Yes.
Amen.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Parents who, and I know it gets tricky because we love our kids and we want them to do their best and be their best. We want this for them. And it's out of love, but it can actually end up tightening the kid's performance. Like when parents are like, okay, you have to do this, this, and this, and this. And, and I see it sometimes where parents kind of drive the audition and want to drive the audition and drive the experience, rather than just hands off. And yeah, I'm just going to let them, I'm not going to interject. I'm not going to coach them. I'm just going to let them do their thing. And I really feel that students who do the best and end up enjoying this the most and the longest are parents who are just hands off and let them take the wheel.
I feel that so personally because I was a little kid in the industry, and I think if my parents were hovering over me and making me do it, I would have burnt out like that. I would have been done.
100%.
But what was so awesome, and what I love to see now, since I'm coaching and I'm watching other parents and seeing everybody succeed, are the parents who are supportive and take them and help them and guide them. But my parents put full trust in the coach. And we're just like, here you go. Here you go. We're good. We don't know anything about it. And didn't, make me feel that pressure, because I know there's a lot of pressure that can be put on these kids. And I thought of it as fun. I thought of it as it's working and it's something I want to do when I'm older, but it's fun overall. So that was a really good point.
Yeah, I mean, this is really important. And it, again, goes back to individual values. You're talking about the difference between a parent sort of enforcing their values on another person, on their kid, rather than allowing their kid to have their own values when it comes to who they want to be as a performer, how they want to relate to it. And it comes from a place of love, usually, and anxiety, and like you said, wanting your kids to do well. But if you're bringing your kid to a professional, it's definitely best to let them handle it. It's better for you. It's better for your kid. It's a better coaching environment. You're going to get a lot more out of it. Really good point, Jessi.
I know parents who walk into the prep and are like, oh my God, thank God. I am so stressed when I'm taping my kid at home. So all these parents are just so relieved because they all struggle with the parent-child relationship when coaching is involved. It's very relieving to be able to drop them off. And I hear that a lot. I don't know if you hear that, Jessi, but
I do.
That's what we get. Yeah.
But it's true. It causes tension in the relationship between the kid and the parent, because the parent's going to talk to their kid a different way than like I would, right? Maybe there's some like fighting involved, and we want auditioning and acting to be a fun experience. And for them, even at a young age, they're still artists. That's one of the things they identify as an artist, as an actor, and we want to cultivate that. And I think auditions and having a parent run that can lean in the opposite direction, where auditions and acting and tapes are stressful now, and we don't want that.
Definitely.
Yeah, I would say just to bring things back to the idea of whether or not resilience is something that you can learn or not. I hope that's okay to bring things back.
Do it. Do it. That's awesome. Give it a full circle.
Great. We're gonna go full circle in this. I really enjoyed this interlude, but I just wanted to say that there's actually research that indicates that there is some genetic predisposition for people being more or less resilient. However, that does not mean that it cannot be learned. So some people may be naturally more resilient than others, but through life experiences, through therapy, through working with excellent coaches, and by practicing different kinds of coping strategies, one can learn to become more resilient over time.
Great. Heard it from the professional.
That's right.
Yeah.
Michael said it.
All right, so we are going to take a quick little commercial break right here, and we will meet back in a sec.
I've been training with Michael Jacobs now for over 3 years, and not only is he a doctor, but he is literally a magician when it comes to singing technique. He's given me my passion back for singing, as well as the confidence I need to be able to sing songs I could have never even dreamed about before. And let me tell you something, I legit don't know what I would do without him.
Oh, that was so sweet. That was just an example of somebody who has worked with Michael and has seen so much growth in themselves with that guidance and that technique and all of these awesome things that they've learned from Michael. So on that note, we are going to get back into the episode. So can you guys talk a little bit about training specifically and how that can help you build resilience as an actor performer?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the idea of what are our values, like Michael was saying before, and just reminding ourselves we're not just auditioning for one role or one audition. It might feel like it at the time, but you're not. There's going to be other auditions. There's going to be other roles to be booked and other things to audition for. You're auditioning for your whole career. It's never about just the one self-tape and about the one thing that you want.
Yes.
So I think constantly being in training, whether it be weekly or bi-weekly, just some sort of always being in this mindset of this is a lifestyle. This is partially how I identify. I identify as an actor. I identify as a storyteller. Training consistently and constantly is flexing your acting muscles. And that goes along with, okay, how do we identify what are our values in life and as an artist?
Yeah, and I would piggyback onto that to say you're going to need resilience in order to work on technique. I was a vocal coach for many years as well, voice teacher, and let's be honest, learning technique isn't always the most fun part of training, and it can be very frustrating. It can take you a long time to learn certain things, to really latch on. Other things maybe you'll pick up more quickly. That can be really frustrating, and it can be hard to get back up, either when you have a failure or even just the idea of continuing to get back up and learn more and continue to grow. And as you said, Jessi, relating it back to your values, maybe you have a growth mindset when it comes to, who you want to be. I want to be a person who's constantly striving to improve as an artist. I want to grow as an artist. That's something I value. You'd better be, going back and working on your technique.
Yep.
Yeah. And it's not just for honing our skills as an actor. I mean, of course it does that. But what I wanted to say is it's conducive to identifying as an artist. You need to be constantly in it. Like if you say you're an artist, if you say you're an actor, you should be constantly involved and surrounded with that and surrounded with people who are like-minded and also striving for the same thing as well.
So we've discussed resilience and being resilient and all of those things. Now we want to know, how can we gain resilience? What are some strategies we can use to be resilient?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question, Taylor. So we've already talked about identifying one's values. That's probably one of the most important components here. Accepting, learning to accept your feelings, learning to perhaps even accept your thoughts, and changing the way that you relate to your thoughts, really. So in ACT, one type of therapy that I do, we call that diffusing from your thoughts, which is sort of gaining distance from them and remembering that your thoughts are not reality. Thoughts are not reality. They're just thoughts. They're just the things that come up in your head. And a lot of times we latch onto them, we hold them really tight, and we think, well, if I thought this, it must be true. And
Yeah.
I mean, how many times have either of you thought something was true or had a thought, believed in it, and then later found out that it wasn't true? Like, oh, I know I did terribly at that audition. I'm never going to book it.
So many times.
And then surprise.
So many times.
So many
Right?
times.
It's always those, by the way. It's always
Literally.
those ones that you book
Yeah.
or get action on.
Exactly. So you're really bad, both of you. Just the two of you are really bad at predicting. Now, we're all really bad. This is the point I've been trying to make.
Jessi and Taylor.
Jessi and Taylor, the two of you are really bad at predicting. No, everybody.
And you need
is
to go to
really
therapy.
bad. You need therapy. This has actually been an intervention, not a podcast. This is just a podcast intervention. That's really what this was.
Wow.
You can thank Teresa. She set this all up.
Teresa.
But yeah, thoughts are not reality. We're all really bad at predicting things. We're all really bad. We have these thoughts. They come up. So that's one thing. So what do we do instead? I think we connect to the present moment and we look for evidence and make decisions based on evidence rather than on whatever thoughts come up in the moment or how we feel in any given moment. And one way to look for evidence is, and one of my favorite ways, is to run a behavioral experiment. So you don't have to take my word for it either. So like, you don't have to take Jessi's word for it. So I'm sure in a lot of sessions with Jessi or you, Taylor, someone says, "Oh, I did so poorly. Oh, I'm not going to book this." And then you say, "Oh no, I thought that was really good." And they shouldn't take your word for it. That's fine. I mean, you're professionals, so maybe it has some meaning, but run a behavioral experiment. Find out what happens, right? What actually happens when you go out there and audition or you get feedback from a group of trusted people. You want to find out what's real rather than just buying into whatever you're thinking or feeling in any given moment.
True. I like that.
Yeah.
And also really important to stick to whatever plan you have. It's a little bit of an aside, but sticking to your plan, unless you get new information, is really important. So the best example I can come up with is if you get to the audition, if you're having an in-person audition, let's say it's a musical theater audition, and then you hear someone else singing your song, or you sort of get to the front of the line and decide, maybe I should sing something else. That's probably coming from a place of anxiety, right? It's almost never a good idea to just pick a new song that you haven't prepared to sing in an audition based on your own spontaneous thoughts and feelings. So unless you get some sort of new information, like they say, like you have a pop song and they're like, absolutely no pop, then, that's new information. You might want to change your song. But sticking to the plan, that's also going to be helpful.
Yeah.
Stick to that plan. All right. Well, I think we're going to start wrapping here. That was just a really, really packed and super important episode. And I think so many performers are going to learn based off of this. So thank you so much, Jessi, for coming back on the podcast. I loved having you on our first episode, and I love talking with you again because I have so much fun. And a very special thank you to Dr. Michael Jacobs for joining us this time. Now, Michael practices in 36 states and growing. And throughout the year, he runs audition and performance anxiety groups and is now enrolling for June. So if you are interested to grow with Michael and learn more about yourself as a performer and really work on that resilience and all these other things, go check out his website. You can enroll there at performancecbt.com. Thank you both.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I think this is really great and also really important and a lot of fun.
Yes. Thank you both so much for joining.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Taylor, for having us as guests. Much appreciated as always.
I'll see you later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.